thanks again for joining us this evening. And I don't know, of those of you who have been to these events before, we do encourage you to drink like English people. It's got a very quick story to tell. I've been a massive fan of Eric Whitacre's work for about 5 years before ever meeting Eric. The work that Eric does, being choral, being very English sounding, and Eric's name being very English sounding, made me kind of profile him in my head as a man maybe in his late 60s with a cardigan that wasn't as comfortable fitting as it was when he bought it, a greying beard, maybe some round spectacles. And that was fixed in my mind. And one day I was working at my studio, which is quite snazzy in London. So the landlord would often take people to my studio and then to Paul's studio, which is directly opposite, to kind of show off the potential. And one afternoon, he brought this very kind of strikingly, I would describe, beautifully American-looking man into the studio because I think at that point this gentleman was interested in possibly having a studio in London. And the landlord said, you know, this is Eric. He kind of specializes in choral works, that kind of stuff. And I went, yeah, oh, great, yeah. And I think Eric said, do you have any choral libraries? I went, no, I haven't done any of that. And kind of left. I was a bit busy. And then I just sat there for about 20 minutes, and I think Eric went into Paul's studio. And I went, excuse the French, was that fucking Eric Whitacre? At which point I ran out of the room. Paul opened his studio door and went, was that fucking Eric Whitacre? And we ran downstairs after Eric, and so started what has been a beautiful collaboration, but also one of the greatest honors in my life is to refer to someone as special as Eric as a friend. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Eric Whitacre.
Thank you. That's the best introduction I've ever had in my life.
So we thought we'd just have a chat, if that's okay. We've had many of these because they've been long days sampling in Air Studios.
Some sober, some less.
Some less sober. I guess because composition is facing a bit of an existential crisis at the moment, I've been really thinking about what it is to compose. And I wonder, Eric, what was the point, and I guess this is a question in two parts, what was the point in your life when you kind of went, there's a thing called composition? And what was the point in your life when you felt that was something that you wanted to do and could do?
Wow. But by the way, are you all composers? How many people are not composers? Can I see hand? Okay, yeah. So we're amongst friends.
Yeah.
So I grew up writing pop music. I didn't read music. I had no classical training at all, and this was the mid-'80s, and so I had an EMU drum emulator, and I composed Ensoniq ESQ1, and basically I just spent my entire high school career trying to write Depeche Mode knockoffs, right? Oh, there it is right there, right? I know. I'm still waiting for him to call me. I'll carry luggage. And then when I was 18, I joined the choir at university. It's the first time I'd ever experienced classical music. And when I look back on it now, I think that, writing these little pop songs, as silly as it sounds, it's very composed. There's very few things as composed as a pop song, right? And because I think composition is really about control and form and making every note is there for a reason, right? In pop music, you only have this much time to do everything. And so when I started singing in the choir, the very first piece that we sang was the Requiem by Mozart. And it just changed my life. I had no idea that you could take this thing that I'd been doing and then do it on this celestial level. And I think even the very first rehearsal that I was in choir, that's when I knew, okay, whatever this is, I have to be a part of this.
What was the route into, forming yourself as a composer from that point? Because, what was so surprising for me is you're from Nevada, and you have such an individual voice, but it doesn't feel as if it's of there.
Yeah, so for me, I guess the way that it happened was very early on, singing in choirs. This is before I'd written any concert music, classical music. I remember singing in harmony with people next to me. I'm a bass, but so say a tenor, and we'd sing in major seconds or minor seconds. If any of you ever sung in a choir or been in the middle of a harmony like that, it's just frizzen, right? It's just wave after wave of chills up and down the body. I still get that when I hear that kind of thing. And so that was my first introduction to what would eventually kind of become my path into it. I just couldn't get enough of that thing. And then 3 years into my 7-year undergraduate degree, I decided to, I took a couple of victory laps. I wrote a little choir piece for this conductor who had changed my life, this man named David Weiler, who was the conductor at the university there. And it starts, the entire choir starts on a single note, and then they move 5 notes up a Lydian scale. And then as they go up, they just peel off, right? So the altos sing just 3 of the notes and stay on the 3rd. The second sopranos go up to the 4th, this kind of thing. And so you start in consonants and then create this cluster. And that's kind of been the way that I think of music, even since that very first note. So it was all born of whatever that mystical thing is that happens in close harmony.
And I guess where I get the Englishness of your work is when you're working in close harmony, vibrato, or the lack of it, is important.
When I started to really fall in love with choirs, and then I would hear recordings of English choirs, then that's what struck me most, is that straight tone sound. Because then when you have close harmony like that, and if you start really dividing it 4, 5, 6, 7 notes in a row, it shimmers, right? A vibrato kills all of that, but non-vibrato singing, to my ear, there's the cluster, and then there's this cloud of overtones. And I'm not a religious person, but if I were, I would say that God lives in those overtones. That's just where all the magic happens. And so I think for years and years, I was writing in an English style, if you will, and then I finally moved there and lived there for 5 years. That's when we met.
I have this terrible thing that to this day, Eric, I wake up in the middle of the night and go, oh, you said that. But again, I would think I was very busy, and Eric and I were talking about, I think it was the second time we met, we're talking about this very thing, about just what Eric said about vibrato and close harmony and stuff. And my response to you was, yeah, and you like doing that, don't you, Eric? A less nice composer, that would have been a career ender. John Williams, out! Composition. This is something that the definition, it changes for me. Is it that spark, the thing that is become something from nothing?
That's really interesting. So I would actually, for me, I would say that that's inspiration. That thing, that spark is, there was nothing, and then, my God, there's an idea. And even if that idea is completely stolen. So, like, I saw 1917 last night. Has anybody seen this? Thomas Newman, my God, what a score. What a score. And there's this major minor thing that he does in the brass where dong, dong, dong. And I thought, yep, I'll take that. And it's I think as composers, we're collectors like that, right? We're just wandering in the forest and just picking up shiny objects. Yep, maybe one day that'll work. And so, to me, that, or even just something conceptual where, oh, you might be able to do that, that's inspiration. But then for me, composition it has more to do with structure than anything else. And that's the grand form, the start all the way to the end of the piece, and then the micro forms within that. So that no note or gesture exists without serving the greater piece. That to me is the greatest aspiration as a composer, trying to compose.
I guess we are storytellers.
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually thinking about that listening to the pieces that were being performed here tonight, that unlike with film composition, right, where the story there's a lot happening to tell the story. Here there's silence and then the music. And so as storytellers, you've got to introduce, here's the ordinary world, here's what this thing wants, here's what won't let it happen, here's the call to adventure, right? The music has to build all of that, and also has to be teaching the language of the piece at the same time. The piece I always think about is The Rite of Spring by Stravinsky, that somehow within this incredible language that he built, he also includes the rule book, the sonic rule book. So that, as you say, you're telling the story, but you actually don't need the ballet. You're being taken on a journey simply because he's teaching you the rules to this incredible world as the piece unfolds.
So let's go back to that point of inspiration. Is it you, Daniel Lanois, he says that he creates like little orphans that he puts into drawers, and one day he hopes to find them a home. So is it something that you collect and gather and then apply? Is inspiration something you simply wait for, or is it something that you can manufacture?
God, I wish I knew. If anybody here knows, please, let's talk afterwards. Yeah, deadline. That is actually...
I'm going to get to that in a minute.
Truth. Yeah, deadline is definitely one form of very potent inspiration maker. So there are definitely things, I mean, we almost have this, like a couple chords or a thing or a musical gesture that we put away in a drawer. We don't know what it's going to be, we just know this works. And it might be years and years, but later on we'll pull that thing out and dust it off and okay, that happens. I've often wondered, like in film composition, say John Williams, did he have those Harry Potter themes just sitting around? Or did they say, here's the biggest franchise in a generation, we just need 6 unforgettable themes? You know,
I think he just went,
yeah, right.
that could have gone wrong.
It's unreal. I really think, yeah, after John Williams, that's the end of an era. I really do believe
absolutely.
that. In terms of manufacturing the inspiration, in my experience, it happens. No, I was going to say no. There's no general rule for it. Sometimes I'll be taking a shower. This must happen to all of us, right? You're in the shower. You're not thinking about anything, and then it's there. Something makes sense. Or you might be talking to somebody, and you're just thinking in an abstract way about the conversation or something, and then oh, there's a thing. You might be improvising for hours and hours and hours, and then The one thing I know now about inspiration, that I've written enough pieces, is that there is this moment where you're kind of trying to find it. You're dancing around it, maybe you're singing it or you're playing it, and then suddenly, almost in a moment, it becomes inevitable. Like that thing has always existed and could never be anything but that. Do you know that feeling? And God, do I wish I knew how to make that happen. Yeah.
Well, I had a bit of an epiphany with some pals I was having a meal with last night. We were talking about the fetid hound of procrastination and how a deadline can be such a cure for that. And my theory, when speaking to a psychoanalyst actually about creativity, is that it's about being in the moment. I mean, it not always happens, but it's about you not thinking about anything else. So for me, it often happens when I'm just about to leave to go to the pub, because it's like, just pub, beer. And so it'll happen at that moment. And I wonder if the deadline is something that forces, because it is the single most important thing that you need to do at that point in time. And everything that leads up to that point has made you, there's always been an excuse not to address the matter in hand, possibly.
Yeah, I think it's definitely part of it. For me, also, part of it is that I think when I think about the music that I want to write, it's always aspirational, and it's always way better than anything I can actually compose. And so whenever I'm writing, it just never lives up to what's in my heart and what's in my mind. And as the deadline approaches, the pain of not finishing is greater than the pain of putting something down. And so you just start making choices. And when it's going really well, you've been working on the thing for a while, and the only choices left to make are props already on the table, right? So you've written musical material here, and this kind of this and this. You don't know how it all works together, but it's like, I have no original ideas except for what I've already done. So let's take this, and then it starts to, it's like Tetris, right? And then you realize, oh my God, the piece is there. I was down this path trying to make all this new stuff, and actually, it just do what I already did. You know what I mean? The answers are already in the DNA of the piece.
Do we think that maybe something that we struggle with is, as you say, is it's got to be better, is actually creating something that is better than you?
Yeah.
But actually, sorry to interrupt, Eric, but actually, when you actually take the tools that you have and your own heritage and the orphans in the drawers, that is good enough.
Yeah, and then that's the odd thing, right? What I found over and over is that I'll start with a, this is incredibly Californian, but I'll start with an intention, right? Clear my mind of toxins, and so, so for instance, I premiered a piece this year called "The Sacred Veil," and it was, thank you, thanks, Mom, and it's like a 55-minute piece for cello, piano, and choir, and it was incredibly personal to me. It was with one of my best friends who his wife had died from ovarian cancer 13 years ago. He's finally writing about the whole thing, and together we crafted this piece that was the whole journey from them falling in love, to them having a baby, to the diagnosis, to the struggle, and then finally her death and catharsis. And so going into it, I had a feeling of what I wanted this piece to be. You know, like what it needed to be and what I hoped it would be. And there's no music that can possibly live up to that aspiration. Just can't. And so I kept having to remind myself along the way as I was struggling with it that if I just keep my eyes focused on that, when I get to the end of it, the piece will sound totally different than I thought it would, but somehow the intention is at the cellular level. It made it through. Do you know what I mean? And then the audiences hear it and they feel it somehow, although the journey took the music in a way that I couldn't have imagined.
It's the struggle part of it.
I have this conversation with myself all the time. I worry that I have conditioned myself to think that it has to be a painful process in order for it to be good, right? Because now you have a few successes and it was awful making the thing. And then your mind tells you, oh, well, the only way to get something good is to really feel the pain. And I've had a few things, years and years and years ago, I wrote a piece called Water Night, which is for choir. And it just happened. I had the poetry in front of me, and I sat down at the piano and started to write it, and then it just flooded. It was like the music was inside the words, and the whole piece took me about 45 minutes. And it's become one of my more performed pieces. And I think back all the time, no, actually, sometimes you can it can be that effortless. But I do worry that I've fallen in love with the suffering.
And your process, you mentioned to me once that you don't compose on the piano. Yeah,
I keep doing this, but that's, all of you pianists or maybe guitarists do this too, right? Even if you're just thinking of the music in your head, you're right, air piano, it's like, yeah, so now what I try to do is I try to stay in my head for as long as possible. And in fact, the first things I'll do aren't musical at all. I'll try to draw what I call the emotional architecture. So I'll take a piece of paper and then draw the emotional journey that I want the audience and the players to go on from start to finish. And I'll write descriptive words, and it might even be something like that chord in Thomas Newman's 1917. I'll write it right there, right? And even if that chord doesn't show up, yeah, those thirds, even if it doesn't show up, then that feeling that I got from those chords, right, or from that moment, and so I try to build it that way. And then I'll sing a lot. Maybe I'll improvise at the piano and maybe stumble on what I call the golden brick. So it's just a note or a couple of notes or a chord that contains all the DNA for the piece. And I've been doing it a while now, so generally I know, oh yeah, that's it. And then I try to go away from the piano and just compose throughout the day while I'm walking or when I'm in the shower or on an airplane, and just be trying as best I can to hear it in my head. Because I found that my fingers will always do a certain thing, right? If I'm in A flat, then my fingers are just going to do an A flat sort of thing. But if I'm in my mind, I tend to make choices that aren't as muscle memory.
I've got a new thing, because I do write on the piano, Eric. And now what I do is I just transpose everything I write as I'm writing it. So I'm in kind of do, re, mi mode and not...
Oh, that's
so
really...
I still make the same shapes, but it's just not in the same key.
Wait, so you transpose like with a button, or you force yourself to transpose?
No, I'm not capable of transposing live. Chowser. Yeah, so that's a little kind of workaround.
You know, this was when I was still auditioning for Depeche Mode back in the 80s. I don't remember what it was, like a Casio CZ101 or 1000. I don't remember, one of those old Casios. But it had this bizarre button in it where you could hit it and it would reverse the direction of the keyboard. Have you ever seen these? Right, so suddenly like the top is here, and as you go down, then it just goes. And if you just play, I remember playing my thing, and suddenly it's just this other planet, right? This whole other thing is happening. And I think it's a really cool way to compose, you know, like to just...
Well, it's like changing and tuning on a guitar, isn't it? You know,
Yeah.
So I knew there was a connection because my first synth was a CZ1000.
Was it really?
Yeah. We can start.
Was it really? Yeah. I think it was a beast too. It would handle anything, and it would stay in tune. Unlike like the Jupiter 8. Did anybody have a Jupiter 8? Which, if it got too hot, it just was like, oh, you can't play that. It's out of tune with itself.
So, writing on the page, and I approached you about doing a sample library, and was that a difficult thing to kind of process? I think it took us a year or so to kind of really, you know, fix it up.
Yeah, what we were going to do, exactly. I remember, ironically, I used all these Spitfire samples, so sometimes what I'll do, especially when I'm writing orchestral music, is I'll mock it up, right, just to see, is this going to sound more or less like I think it's going to? And more often than not, I'm surprised, and it doesn't, and then I use the samples to find... So I knew and loved the company. I was also fangirling a lot when I came up to see the studios. Yeah, so then, but when I started to think about what I did, and especially, so I have my own professional choir in London, and they're not just singers anymore. They're close to me, these people. You know, I know them. As I'm composing now, especially choral music, when I think of the altos, I see these 5 faces. It's not just altos and so the idea of somehow boxing them, do you know what I mean? And making them available to other people. I think at first I felt really protective and strange about that. Yeah, but then I have to say it was actually the Evo grid and the way you described it, and then starting to play with other Evo grids, where that's when I thought, oh, okay, we're not just talking about ooh, ah, e. Like this is, you can build a paint box in a way. That's when it started to come to life for me. And then I imagined for myself, how would I compose if I personally had this? One of the things that I found is that I miss is being in my head all the time, is actually being inspired by the sound itself. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So when you're just thinking notes and structure and rhythm, it's only at the performance do you ever get that satisfaction. And I think at the time I had the first volume of Omnisphere. And I remember I would just sit sometimes and just play those huge evolving things and just get turned on by it, you know, like, God, you could do this, and what if you could, and it starts making me think about things in a different way. And so that, I think, was the way in when I started thinking about what we could do with the sample library.
And it's been such an amazing journey. Eric conducted every single one of those samples. And there's something about the voice that, I don't know, we've all done vocal sessions with pop, and you know, you say the wrong thing at the wrong time, and then that's it for the day, you've lost it. Yeah. And I think that's what we realized very early on, is that you were literally drawing it out. And the things that you apply to conducting a band had to be applied to a sample session. Yeah,
we realized early on, I don't think I had planned to do all those sessions, but it's the most incredible thing with voices. It's just, well, here, we can do it. Are any of you singers? Perfect. Okay, so let's do this. So, ooh, let's just do an ooh. Okay, ready? So. Good. Again, ready? Okay. Again, ready? Okay, so the group of us who have never met before, right? And the colors that we can get this quickly, right? It's unbelievable. And so I realized early on that we would have like, okay, we need to do piano oohs on a G, for instance, right? But even the idea of piano is different from my fingers this way to my fingers this way to this, and those singers are so good, right? There's such subtlety that then I thought, okay, I have to be there for every note. We have to be getting, and so the singers actually talked about it as these meditative experiences, where for 8 hours during the day, there was nothing but that note and us, and just letting it spin and.
But you had the added ingredient of jet lag as well, and there'd always be this, because it was session after session after session, single notes, and there'd be this moment, usually about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, where it'd be like you'd seen ghosts, just like.
Yeah, it was rough.
But we knew it was necessary. I've just got 2 more questions before maybe we throw it out to the crowd. Often you'll work with a libretto or an idea like the Sacred Veil that you spoke of. What about pictures? That's something you've ever dabbled with, ever wanted to? Yeah.
That's really interesting. So I don't do it with that much intention, but I feel like every instrumental piece I've ever written is really a film score without a film. So I have very clear images in my mind of what they are. Do you know what I mean? I wrote this piece called Equus, which means horse in Latin. And in my mind, I can hear in the sections that, okay, here's the horses, they're far, this misty, and then suddenly you're right up next to them and you see the bone and the sinew. And so I think I'm just a very visual person. In fact, I would probably say I'm more visual than musical, I think. I don't know if my wife would agree with that, but yeah, I think I'm so visual that I get great inspiration from pictures.
But a burgeoning career as a film composer?
Maybe, so I've dabbled a little bit. I worked
Did you like it?
Yeah, well, my only experience is working with Hans Zimmer, right? So that's a very specific.
Slumming it then.
Yeah. It's a very specific, thrilling, carnival-like experience. Do you know what I mean? It's just, I think Hans is in the best sense of the word, he's just chaos. Like the idea is just make this tornado of madness, and then this magic appears. And so it was fun to be part of that. But then watching the lifestyle of a film composer, it scared me a little bit. I thought, I could see it just draining years from people's lives in the studio. And maybe. I think if the right project came along, I'd love to be
Sam Mendes, 1943.
1984 is what I'm thinking, Sam.
Last thing I just wanted to ask, Eric, is what's next, if you're allowed to talk about it?
So I just wrote a little chamber opera, and that's finished. And we recorded this piece, Sacred Veil. And now I'm writing a piece, an orchestra piece. And all I have is the title, just Bounce. And it just comes from an idea that I had years ago where I thought, you think of a bouncing ball, dum, 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 right? It's simple. But I've never heard that used in an orchestral setting in a contrapuntal way, right? Where you've got different families that are boom, 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 done all at the same time. Ding, 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 ding. And I thought, I've just never heard that. That's the next thing, is trying to figure out how to make an orchestra bounce.
Well, we look forward to that, I'm sure. Let's throw questions out to you guys for Eric. Miriam's got the microphone.
I'm so interested in your routine, just as a human being and as a creator. And I always wonder, these people that have, quote unquote, made it, I'm like, how many hours of productive work do you get done during the day, if any? Do you even think of it like that? And what's your daily, weekly, monthly routine like to actually get stuff done?
Wow. Half of my life is traveling and conducting. So when it's on the road, it's just whatever, right? And it's time zones and this, Christian, you know all about this, right? Where it's just that weird other world of those time zones. When I'm at home, if I feel like if I were to the way iPhones now show you at the end of the week how much screen time you've had, like if I had a little device that was, here's how much work time you've had, I feel like it would be nothing. I think it would be very small until the project started to get close, and then it would be 21 hours a day. But talking to my wife, she observes that I think probably like most of us, I'm kind of working all the time, especially once a project starts. I just can't turn it off. And sometimes I know for myself, I even struggle to be present. I'm working on it and then having a conversation, and I think you probably just go blank. I think when I was younger, I probably got away with it better, and now I think I just go away. It's baby, I'm going to talk about you. My wife's standing back here, but she's from Europe. She's Belgian, and so she's, for the first time in my life, I'm starting to understand the balance between work and life in a way that I never did before. And so I guess I'm living a little bit more than I used to, if you know, even just in the small ways. Yeah.
But that, I think, is such an important thing, something that I really, I'm striving to really kind of shout about, is the time away from your computer or away from your pen and paper is work, because we do live it. And I think it's really important not to feel that you have to be strapped to your desk.
Yeah, absolutely. And also it's inspiration for the work, but then also it's just life, right? That there can be this whole part of your day that doesn't have anything to do with that other thing. You can just enjoy being alive, you know? This is actually kind of new to me with the Protestant American upbringing.
Magnus.
Thank you, Eric. Great to meet you. A question, I think, possibly for both of you. How do we escape the beautiful tyranny of equal temperament? And obviously, as a writer for voices, you can create Ligeti-type sort of microtonal stuff, but it's something that isn't obviously that readily available. Do we have to train the public to enjoy music that plays the notes between the notes? But I think particularly working with choral music, it must be something that you're constantly interested in, clusters or shifts, microtonal shifts. I wonder what your thoughts were on that. Pythagorean, just tunings, different tunings and different note bases. I mean, there's a whole world out there available that we're not giving people. I was wondering what your thoughts were on that.
It's so funny. So my wife and I had dinner with Jacob Collier last year. Do you all know who Jacob Collier is? And he's from another planet, truly, a genuine bona fide genius. And actually, he talks a lot. Magnus, did you say Magnus? Yeah, he talks a lot like you. And he was asking me all these questions too, and I was saying, I'll be honest with you, I can't tell the difference. like I actually don't hear it. I don't hear that. What I definitely hear in choral music, which I love, is depending on the vowel that they're singing. So if we sing, say, ooh, here, then it's got a whole different overtone cloud than ah, right? And so let's say you're singing a minor chord with a choir, the basses have to make sure that their voice is darkened in a way that they don't pop a major third into that minor chord, right? Because suddenly it sounds out of tune, but in a way that you wouldn't really know what's happening there. So that stuff, I think my ear is attuned to.
2001, the Ligeti music was the most famous example, perhaps, of music that does that.
Which is it's extraordinary.
It's extraordinary.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
I guess just for me, I don't know how to conceive of it. Do you know what I mean? I can look at it on the page and think, my God, this is beautiful, but I can't hear it in my head. And for me, always I want to hand a score to a group of musicians and know exactly what I want. Do you know what I mean? And I think Ligeti could, and I just can't.
It's very interesting. I studied quite heavily Iraqi music for a film that I got fired off, so that was worth it. Bitter old man. But it was very interesting, actually, because a lot of the kind of Iraqi systems, it became very apparent to me that it was kind of innate and environmental. And it wasn't just that it was a different scale, it was very dependent on the direction of travel. So if you imagine a semitone, if you were going up, you'd be that sharp between the two notes. If you're going down, probably the wrong way around, it would be there. It'd be very obvious when you got that wrong. And that kind of innate sense of microtonal tuning is, I think, if you're not surrounded by it and you don't grow up with it, I think it's very difficult. But it's something that certainly I'm very interested in, and people remind us that there's quite a lot of microtonal problems with our libraries. Anyone else?
So I'm kind of new to the whole sample library world. I feel like a bit of a tourist here, but about a year ago, a friend of mine turned me onto the whole Spitfire thing, and I grew up on Sibelius, Hear it, notate it, engrave it, that's my thing. And I had no idea that you could get stuff that sounded so good, like so realistic. And I'm sure people here are, you're pros, and you're thinking, well, some of it's closer than others, I don't know. But for me, it was mind-blowing. And so now you have your own sample library with your name on it. I'm writing a paper, I'm like you, I'm taking forever to finish my degree. And I have this thought in my head that the masses, a lot of people can't really tell the difference between the real thing often. And I do this little test, like in my class just the other day. I played them a couple of demos from the Spitfire library, actually. And I said, hey, is this a British orchestra? You think this is a European orchestra, an American one? And they all threw out their guesses, but they were blown away when it was like, well, that's a mock-up. Someone did it on a computer. And they had, everyone I talked to, my family, they're all blown away. So I guess my question is, now that you have your own library, like your own or whatever, but what are your impressions? What do you think? How realistic is it? How convincing is it? For me, it's just this whole new world, and it's mind-blowing, and I don't know if it is for you as well, but does that make any sense?
Yes,
it's a muddy question, but thanks.
No, it's a great question. So I would say, in general, this is very in general, I would say sample libraries do some things extremely well. Extremely well. Other things, not quite yet. Or you just have to spend thousands of hours programming it to get it to sound pretty darn realistic. One thing that I feel I'm hearing now, especially here in film scores, is you're hearing the effect of the sample libraries on real orchestras. And what I mean by that, for instance, is like you can't see a Marvel movie without hearing marcato strings. Dun, 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 dun. And the reason is obvious. It's because they sound freaking great in the samples. And then you can sit the director down next to you and say, I've got this idea, and it's like right in there, yes, yep, that thing, right? And now you hear orchestras, and having worked with Hans and then watching him work, it's like, well, now the actual orchestra isn't enough. It doesn't have enough steroids. So you have to either double it with itself or double it with samples. So you're kind of creating this other thing, right, that's not orchestra, which is fine. As long as it serves the picture and the story and it works, it moves you emotionally, fantastic. When it comes, though, to things, for me, very specifically about writing music for choir, I still think there is a strength in having real-world experience. Do you know what I mean? And so I always encourage young composers who are thinking about writing for choir, just write something, anything. Let's make it 8 bars, get in front of a real group of living, breathing human beings, and let's just try to rehearse it. And it's amazing. Within just a few seconds, you start to learn very quickly. Oh, that register isn't what I thought it would be. Oh, they have to breathe here. Breaths are more interesting than I thought they were. The vowels, oh, that's a thing that, Sibelius says I can write this note, but as it turns out, no, I can't. That kind of real world experience then creates something that's more alive to my ears.
I could so do a kind of an hour on this, but I'm going to just try and condense it down into 3 comments in total support of what you said, Eric. I think that often with hybrid scores, the orchestra can add 1%, but it's a very difficult 1%. It's that last just cherry on top that's really difficult to achieve. Secondly, I think that whilst people may not be able to tell the difference, I often find that a score that is fully sampled will put your hairs up, but when it's played by live players, or if there's a component of live, it'll make you cry. But thirdly, and it happened to me, I actually, whilst I've been here, I've been finishing a TV series, and I wrote the final cue of this series, and it was meant to be a hankies out moment. And I wrote something with some amazing cello samples, bespoke cello samples that I've created. And I just said, I just think that possibly if we've got a live cello player in, it's just piano and cello, it really will make a difference. And, I've done so many scores and I've done so many sample sessions, but when this thing came back, I wasn't supporting the picture, I was elevating it, or rather the cellist was, and just transformed the scene. So I think all is good. I just see sampling as a form of collaboration with musicians, and it's just putting them, literally, there's no threat to musicians. It promotes and encourages communication with them. All it is putting musicians, connecting them with composers in slightly different parts of the workflow than was 20 years ago. So we work with live musicians making samples. They get involved very early on in the score, and then they get involved at the end. And I think that's a very interesting thing that I'm wanting to investigate as a composer. Sorry, this is your evening, Eric. But I just naturally, as a composer first and foremost, I never want samples to be seen as a threat to live music, because it is everything.
That being said, we have time for one more question.
Make it profound.
Hi, it's not going to be profound, but I'm curious.
You got a great voice.
Thanks. If you want to put me in one of your choirs, let me know. Have you ever thought about dabbling back into a pop record? And two-part question, is the Casio, do you still have it? And if it is it for sale? Because I'll buy it.
Oh, man. I do still have the Casio.
You do?
It's in my parents' house. I don't know if it still works. I haven't plugged it in 20 years, but
Okay.
Those things are workhorses. It probably does.
Yeah.
And are you serious? Have I ever thought about a pop record?
Sure, why not? You started it that way, so why not finish that way?
You know what's super interesting about that question is these days, what is pop anymore, right? It's I don't even, so the idea of making something that was an album of popular songs is pretty intriguing. I hadn't thought about it until you said it. But yeah, so we'll have to co-produce on it. I think now the world is open. Even just my Spotify playlists are just whatever, right? There seems to be good music and not so good music. Those are the two genres. Yeah.
We have an amazing cellist in Britain. He's very young. He played at Meghan and Harry's wedding. And he's charting, not in the classical charts, but he's number 8 in the equivalent of the Billboard with music written by Elgar. And I think that is a sensational thing to witness. I think the world, the division is going to kill us. And I think if anything, there's something that people in this room can do, and that is just to bring people together. That's our only hope. So I do think that we are responsible for something really, really important, and is to get away with division and just bring people together and get Elgar into the charts. Amen. Eric, it's Cheers, man. It's always spiritual when we sit down, sober or not so. So, Eric, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And on behalf of us all, it's been a really special evening. Thank you so much.
Truly my pleasure. Thank you all.
So just some quick housekeeping. We have to be out of here by 9. So we've got about 8 minutes to just say thanks, love ya, see you at the next one.